we know research is showing that anxiety and depression are at their height after COVID. That was what I was seeing in my patients. People were struggling in different ways. Mood and anxiety are the leading issues that people are dealing with right now. Unfortunately, that emotional toll is still showing in people because there's so many more people, including young folk, who are just suffering with anxiety. Where do you start? I was getting emails and calls to say, I'm sleeping better. I want to do more. What else can we do with this? Can I come in next week and can we add to the list of tasks? Find a solution that is easy for them so they don't feel as overwhelmed. I think that one of the benefits is that people do lose weight. Their brain fog improves, their concentration improves, because we're really fending off any type of cognitive change by eating healthy for our brain and for our brain cells. We have to sort of reteach ourselves, because the food industry is not really going to do that. They're not going to tell us the amount of sugar. They can have the label, but it's up to us to get educated. People know about serotonin and they call it the happiness hormone. Well, much of the serotonin, about 90% of it, is made in the gut, as well as where the receptors are located. So we start to realize that where our food is being digested is also where these neurotransmitters are hanging out.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Gabby Reece Show. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. My guest today is nutritional psychiatrist Dr. Naidoo. She comes from Harvard Psychiatric and has a new book out called Calm Your Mind on Food. Now, I love this conversation. It's right in my wheelhouse because through her own examination and practice, and even an experience of being diagnosed with cancer herself, she really dove a little deeper into bringing the practices of best foods to support, let's say, depression and anxiety. And we get all into it. What foods agitate us? No surprise, things like sugar, gluten, and that, did you know that there are over 200 names for added sugar? Dr. Naidoo does a really beautiful job of not only breaking it down and giving you really simple takeaways, but taking all the shame out of it. This isn't about us feeling bad that we're not doing it better, but it's saying, hey, let's figure out what is making you feel depressed or anxious and what can we do to make you feel better. Just one step at a time, not doing everything all at once. It's a loud and busy world. And she does a great job of not only slowing it down, but keeping it practical and realistic to whatever your life and demands on you may be. So I hope you enjoy my show with Dr. Naidoo. Dr. Naidoo, welcome to the show. I am really excited to talk to you for a number of reasons. But what we find is that people really, they want to talk about food. They all, it's something, it's like the three times a day battle. And in your work, I think what you're doing is so important because you have the credibility of coming from what people perceive as kind of more of a traditional training, like Harvard and sort of, this, oh, well, she knows what she's talking about. And what I'm curious about is you go after your education, you sort of maybe thought your practice was going to be one way. And how did you adapt, and what gave you the courage to say, oh, wait a second, I need to have an adjunct to my practice and sort of talk about these other things?
Firstly, Gabby, it's great to see you again, and thanks for hosting me on your podcast. Love your message as well. I think the biggest thing, there were two sort of big moments, kind of light bulb moments for me. One was as a young resident still learning psychiatry and learning the medications, a patient challenged me. And that really taught me to integrate nutrition into what I was saying, because he was accusing me of causing him to gain weight. And I knew from the stats and the medical record that even though I was prescribing an SSRI, which can cause weight, it wasn't, he had just started it. He was already a little overweight, etc. But it taught me an important message. He was drinking a very large cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee. And I asked him, well, what did you put in your coffee today? And when he told me that it was more than a quarter cup of processed creamer and 8 sugars, He wasn't thinking, he was just repeating what he asked for at the counter. And I was able to share the nutritional information with him by showing him the calories, but showing him that they were empty calories. And it was a light bulb moment for him. His eyes lit up. I taught him something that he could easily change a habit. So he was consuming this, Gabby, before he even ate breakfast. It taught me that if someone is equipped with the information, especially if I'm prescribing a medication which could cause weight gain, it was really important for them to understand that. And it started me on a path and a journey. And another light bulb moment was later in my career, and I was unexpectedly diagnosed with cancer and was experiencing my own anxiety for the first time in my life. And I was kind of trying to decide, facing these medications that I was about to accept, but also understanding the side effects were very scary. And I sort of had this moment where I thought to myself, well, I do this every day. I help people with how to eat and how to adjust their lifestyles. I hadn't had a moment to think, and I decided I was going to lean into it. And so I unexpectedly became kind of the blueprint of my work, because I proved it to myself that by adjusting and tweaking a relatively healthy diet, none of us is perfect, but I was able to manage my side effects so much better. And those two things really, for me, solidified the importance of allowing people to explore this work and have it as an option for them.
Yeah, it's interesting that you had to go through something that not only made you better at helping other people, but probably even more empathetic about dealing with anxiety and fear. And, you deal with patients that have really serious, I know that was, kind of an incident because you're dealing with a scary thing like cancer, but just giving you that perspective that maybe people feel that way all the time.
You know what was so humbling about it, Gabby, because that's an excellent point. Two things were very humbling. One is being on the other side of the prescription pad, or the online prescriptions, or however people are accepting their medications these days. But that was very humbling to be in a position where I was really having to understand the side effects and decide for myself and comply and all of that. But the other part was that it taught me that, this work is real. There's a lot of evidence behind it. I was seeing it in my patients, but when I proved it to myself, I think that was a very cementing experience for me, and really, for me, made it come alive even more and made me bolder about bringing the message forward to be able to help more people.
How would a person approach either improving or, navigating steps towards improvement? Because I think people sometimes feel, they don't know what to do.
I agree. So I'll quickly show you a cover of the next book, which we're sending to you as we get the hardcover copies.
Yes, because I read your This Is Your Brain on Food, and I really love it, and I want to talk about that as well. But
thank you. So the short answer, Gabby, is that during COVID, all the points you mentioned were what were impacting people. The most devastating effect was also on their mental health. So not just the physical impact of those who suffered COVID or long COVID or any of those symptoms. It was also that we know research is showing that anxiety and depression are at their height after COVID. And I decided to write the book because that was what I was seeing in my patients, working throughout COVID and just seeing how they were navigating this new world with their families, with trying to meal prep, with working from home, then with the hybrid model, with the angst that was coming from the news, then the vaccines, then sometimes mixed messages. Whatever it was, people were struggling in different ways. And that, unfortunately, that emotional toll is still showing in people, because there's so many more people, including young folk, who are just suffering with anxiety. Where do you start? I often will say to someone, what's bothering you about what you're eating or drinking? Because sometimes it can be a beverage, sometimes it can be a lot of soda or even an energy drink that's, pumped with sugar. And that's often a good way to start the conversation, because someone has identified maybe ice cream that they've started eating every night during COVID. And and they can find a place to start working from because they've identified for themselves as bothering them. And that's often one place to start because I don't like people to feel deprived. So I want them to feel like we're filling up that nutritional psychiatry plate for them with more foods and more options. But often it's the habit that's bugging them that we have to start to pivot on and maybe find a replacement. Like, can you have a fruit-based dessert? Can you have a piece of dark chocolate with, clementine, something like that?
Are you saying that people will come to you and say, and by the way, I have this thing that I feel a little beholden to, this ritual or this thing that I'm medicating with, like an ice cream or something? Because that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a temporary kind of
Yes,
dopamine.
that's right. It's a way to,
for a
that's
second.
it. Yeah, it's feel good. Yeah.
Do they internalize that and say, I know this practice. I don't want to do this. I feel bad about it. So you're saying intuitively people kind of really have a sense of this already.
People often, so it's mixed in my practice. Some people come in just presenting with the anxiety and feeling desperately anxious. And what can I do? Can I get, Zoloft? Can I, can I work with you with nutritional practice? I've had this happen. But on the other hand, some people come because it's a nutritional lifestyle and metabolic psychiatry practice. Sometimes people come in with, I know this is bothering me. I've gained a few pounds. I'm not sleeping well. My husband and I are drinking, 2 glasses of wine a night when we usually only had 1 glass on a Friday night at dinner. Whatever, it's a varied number of things, and it often includes things that people are drinking as well. And those people intuit that something is wrong. Maybe it's a habit, maybe it's too much, maybe it's, not eating enough of their vegetables or taking a healthy lunch to work like they might have been doing. And they then come in with that bothering them. And that's often a really good place to say, well, that's one thing we can start to work on while we build out a plan. Because what I'm noticing now, because of the uniqueness of each of us in our microbiome, the plan for each person is slightly different. So what you may need to eat is not necessarily going to be the same thing as the next person. And the science is evolving around food as medicine as well.
I think it is interesting, though, that if we can be honest with ourselves and have that practice. And you said something really important. I went through this with my husband. He, I'd say about 16 years ago, stopped drinking alcohol altogether. But what was interesting, because of the sugar and alcohol, people don't realize that we then kind of are managing a sugar addiction, which I always think it's funny. They serve donuts at AA. I always, it's like one for the other. And my husband doesn't eat desserts, but let me tell you, that first kind of 6 weeks, he wanted dessert because he realized that, okay, that alcohol is a no-go. And then it became a giant bottle of Pellegrino, something in lieu of something else. So I just want to bring that up because I think we do get attached to habits or rituals or that a certain feeling. And it's so easier if we can find that substitution that, doesn't impact us so negatively. I think it really is a really helpful tool.
I love what you said because I had an example that occurred during COVID where I was able to work with more than one person was working with an executive, and he was used to having a martini when he went out to his business meetings. So he would look forward to that, and maybe his business meetings were, 3 nights a week. But now he was at home, and he and his wife started to either have a glass of wine or mix a martini. So I was able to work with him because he was so used to this habit of actually using a sparkling water like Pellegrino and pouring it in chilled, using the special martini glass that he had with I think he had a twist or some olives or something in it, and actually have it for most of the evening, just sipping the water and enjoying it. And once, maybe a couple times a week, have the martini if he wanted it. But it was more that he realized, and what switched for him in his head was he really liked the idea of holding the glass and the chill effect. And honestly, he wasn't, although he had gotten a little too used to them, he was able to switch out of that, and he did it carefully. But it's so important to be able to replace a habit that someone enjoys. In this case, it was the aesthetic of holding the glass and all of that feeling with something that was healthier for him.
Yeah, and I think that that's important. And you said it, you don't want people to feel deprived. And I feel like our psychology never works well. We get fixated on the very thing that we say, oh, you can't have that. And so I really think that that's an important part of getting people to make shifts. And I appreciate that. So your focus is, you know, integrating, bridging nutrition with mood.
Yes, nutrition with mental health and mood and anxiety are the leading, issues that people are dealing with right now.
Would you say that that's, I often wonder too, because we do have sort of a never a pause because of technology, right? There's always one more email to answer, one
Yeah,
more
that's
text.
right.
And then also everything's very easy. Like if I want
Yes.
something, I can just order it and deliver. I wonder from your point of view, um, in a world that's gotten very easy and also easy to occupy our minds, maybe with things that don't support our mood or mental health,
Mm.
how much of it, it's almost like if we had to put our phones away or work a little more for something, we would almost maybe feel better. Like somehow all of this ease is actually working against our biology.
I agree with you on that point as well. One of the other things that occurred the last few years is how easy it was to get food delivered, and how easy it was to have that replace the tension many of us may have been feeling about how many meals do I prepare. I've got now, kids are back from college, families were back together uh, because of the situation in COVID. And sometimes there was a lot of stress around meals because parents or whoever was preparing the food were now doing multiple meals instead of what was usually, an easy pattern that they'd gotten into. One of the things that I like people to understand about food is to find something that they either like to do that replaces that habit of just hitting the button on the phone, hitting the app that they're going to use and getting something delivered. Maybe even replacing a recipe. Say they like Mexican food. Is there a version of that, one of the dishes they like, that they can do more healthfully at home? It's not so hard. You just get a few spices. We can still order stuff online, but we order the groceries online, or we just learn to get stuff from the farmers market, because I think almost changing a little bit of the mindset around that becomes important. And people feel that when they even get their children involved in food preparation or food shopping and choosing those colorful vegetables and choosing something different to eat, maybe a vegetable they haven't tried or fruit they haven't tried, it becomes more of a family involvement, and it becomes more of a group task that can be enjoyed. It doesn't have to feel like a chore. So changing the mindset around that ease, I think, is very much, we tend to be an impatient nation because things are easy for us. We can order stuff online, we can order it on our phone, and things are pretty much on our doorstep without much time. So stepping back a little bit from that and realizing that some of those things are not helping us. If you suddenly need something for your computer, and you're getting onto a podcast and you need it delivered from the stationery store, that's very different. But food and beverages, and even in some places, in certain instances, alcohol, it can be easily delivered. So we need to figure out our way around this and decide what's best for our health. And that has to be an internal decision that someone comes to. Often it's hard to tell someone that because they don't always want to hear it. They've got to come to it.
Can we talk about specifically, let's call it the class of anxiety and depression and even, ADHD? There's some very specific things. And again, I'm honoring that everyone is different, but things that show up that can really impact this. So maybe we could just start with good old fashioned sugar.
Yep.
Nobody wants to talk about sugar, but the thing is it's not only real, it's also in everything. And how many
Right.
what are there, like, I don't know how many number of names for sweeteners, 200
Good
or something
point.
like that?
Yeah, it's actually the last time I checked, the repository had 262 other names used for sugar on food labels. So my favorite is brown rice syrup because people associate brown rice with the healthier grain, and it's actually brown rice syrup is simply sugar. So I think that's an excellent point because I ask people to read that on their food labels and look to see if the food label is huge and they don't recognize the names, likely a ton of sugar in that. But knowing where the hidden sugars are becomes important, and often it's savory foods. So store-bought tomato sauce, ketchup, salad dressings, yogurts. Fruited yogurts. People think, well, blueberries are super healthy. Dr. Naidoo said so. Then they get a fruited yogurt, but a half cup can have up to 8 teaspoons of sugar. So someone understanding that 4 grams. 1 teaspoon of sugar is 4 grams is important because our food labels are using grams, but our recipes have pounds and ounces and teaspoons and cups and things like that. So someone just looking at a food label and knowing that they can calculate even a protein bar. This is a so-called, this is a favorite protein bar or something that they like or they think is healthy. And they look at it and it actually has so much sugar, even though it has other actually relatively healthy ingredients. So it's all a learning, what those options are.
I think it's especially interesting because you have people who now they're trying, but you just said they have 260 names for sugars. And so I think people either one of two things happens. Either they go, okay, the middle of the store is out. I'll make my own dressings at home. I know Primal
Right.
Kitchen ketchup has no added sugar. And I have one of my teenage daughters is like, complains about it. But if you just started your 6-year-old or 5-year-old with ketchup like that, they wouldn't know the difference.
They wouldn't know. Yeah.
Right. But it's like this idea of trying to really support people through not feeling overwhelmed. Like, oh, what can I eat? There's nothing I can eat. There's nothing easy. But the fact is like, we were never really supposed to eat that stuff.
We weren't supposed to eat that stuff. And I think the point that you made is actually excellent because the more times we can offer someone in real time, offer them a solution like a ketchup with no sugar or salad dressing, a 3-ingredient vinaigrette, you can make in a mason jar. You have these ingredients at home. Provides a solution that is easy for them so they don't feel as overwhelmed. A couple of things about sugar. I think people don't realize that sugar actually directly impacts neurons and it impacts the brain. So the more sugar we consume is really not helpful for us. We have to consume sugar. It's part of our natural need in the body and a nutrient we need. But we can consume it from fruit, from other foods that get broken down into sugar. But we just don't want those added sugars. The other thing I think that people don't realize is that there's been research, and you alluded to it earlier on, that showed that cravings for sugar taps into the dopamine reward pathway, which is the same pathway that, say, a street drug like cocaine activates. So it can easily become something we get too used to. Unfortunately, food manufacturers figured out way back that when the low fat pieces came in, I think it was, certainly decades ago, they reduced the fat, but they added back in sugar to flavor up food. So little things like that. And then the development of, things like high fructose corn syrup have not helped us because they had so many foods. So you're right, food is not intended if you think about how our grandmothers, our great grandmothers baked or cooked, they were using natural ingredients. They were not pumping things up with either artificial sweeteners or tons of cane sugar and stuff like that. They were baking in a slight and cooking in a very different way, and we have to sort of reteach ourselves because the food industry is not really going to do that. They're not going to tell us the amount of sugar. They can have the label, but it's up to us to get educated about it.
So you mentioned something that I just want to go back to. You talk a lot about neuroinflammation, neurooxidative stress, neuroplasticity, emotional immunity, and reinforcing the gut-brain axis. So it's really getting people to understand the pathway from the brain and the gut and how interconnected it is. This is something that you spend a lot of time sharing and talking about with your patients.
One of the mechanisms in nutritional psychiatry that helps us understand this connection between food and mood, food and anxiety, and food and mental health overall is this gut-brain connection. And it's one of the mechanisms. So, for example, many people don't realize that the gut and brain arise from the exact same cells in the human embryo, and they divide up and form organs which are far apart in the body, but they remain connected by the 10th cranial nerve called the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve allows for two-way messaging of these chemical messages and neurotransmitters between the brain and the gut all the time. Now, if you take that a step further, you realize that, people know about serotonin and they call it the happiness hormone. Well, much of the serotonin, about 90% of it, is made in the gut as well as where the receptors are located. So we start to realize that where our food is being digested is also where these neurotransmitters are hanging out. They all interact with the trillions of microbes in our gut. And these microbes, on a day that we are eating the healthy foods and healthy fats and healthy salads and lots of fiber, are broken down to products in the gut, which are short-chain fatty acids, which actually lower inflammation, fend off oxidative stress, etc., and really feed and nurture the microbes. But on days that we kind of going through that fast food lane and upsizing the fries that we buy because they're sort of engineered and they actually have sugar in them, they they're engineered to be hyperpalatable. So we're upsizing, we're finishing the fries, and if that's what you're consuming, then the breakdown products of those meals are actually more toxic to the gut environment and the lining of the gut, which is a single cell lining thin. And that's when you start to create damage over time to the gut and set up inflammation and oxidative stress, etc. The damage to the gut then can lead to things like leaky gut. So just a simple breakdown of how this gut-brain connection explains that food-mood connection, and just an important understanding we need to have.
I think that's so helpful, and I love your take on, because we have, I don't even know if they can count trillions, in our microbiome.
Trillions microbes.
And it's like, feeding the good, not feeding the bad. I don't think they really know. So it's like, listen, try to eat good and let's see what happens. But I found, and I'm curious your take on this. For example, if I am eating weird food, like I'm off the rails a little bit, or sugar, I see that becomes a more powerful calling. And, someone said to me once, well, maybe you're feeding that group in your microbiome, they're becoming more powerful. They're asking and requesting, because I guess the notion is you sort of have this telepathic communication from the gut to the brain, and the gut is like, hey, let's get more of that sugar because those guys are powerful. And so, I mean, sometimes I think when we can look at it that way, like, we're not bad people, we're not lazy, we're not getting it. It's like, no, we've got some really powerful things happening inside us, calling for these things. We just have to ride it out and, eat and not drink certain things to let the other elements of the microbiome build up. I don't know. I think if people realize there's sort of that little battle going on in there.
There's a battle and a balance. You're absolutely correct. So, those good microbes are the ones that eat the salad and the healthy fats and are happy. The bad microbes are the one who are like, those French fries and all that sugar and that ice cream. That's when they thrive. And when they thrive, they actually upset the balance by taking over. And that's when they form these toxic substances. So rather than label ourselves and get upset, I think you're right about that, because it's so easy for these things to bother us. Rather, we think about it as, look, it's a battle between these microbes, and it's how we decide to feed them. There are things that are, part of how our brain works, like stress precipitates habit circuits in the brain. So if we are very stressed and we're reaching for ice cream or reaching for whatever that so-called treat may be, unfortunately, those treats mistreat the brain. So it's a delicate balance. So we feel stressed, we start to eat that. But then, like you said, either the microbes are like, oh, I want more of that, or the brain signals like, the stress precipitates this habit circuit, and I want to go the following night and I get 2 cups of ice cream, a little bit more, different flavor. It starts to set us up that way. if we just understand those things a little bit and see that, do we build in, a mindful practice? Do we find a recipe, which I have actually, and this is your brain on food, where we made an ice cream just from bananas, and you can actually make a chocolate flavor by adding something good for your brain, which is cacao nibs and natural cacao. And make it a chocolate flavor, so there are ways to get around this by having the thing that you crave, but making a better version of it. And for me, what I find with my patients is that interrupts that circuit where they're like, well, Nick, I'll have only half a bowl tomorrow, but it ends up being a full bowl or two, because your mind is looking for it, your brain is looking for it, and your body is looking for it, and so are the microbes. They're craving it too. So that is correct. And I think the more that we just can help ourselves understand that, the more we can maybe shift our habits a little bit.
Yeah, I read years ago that book, 10% Human, and basically it sort of implies that we're here to serve the microbes, and, we're kidding ourselves if, we think that we're, hosting them. It's sort of like we give them a place to live and they're kind of calling the shots on a lot of levels.
And yes, this is true.
I mean, and in a way, it's always about personal responsibility, but when we can understand how powerful it is to get these systems in place, I think we can really support ourselves. And what about alcohol? Maybe we could just, I don't really, alcohol, I find it very interesting because I grew up in a culture. I grew up in the Caribbean, and like islands, alcohol it's very cultural. So I didn't really take to drinking alcohol too much, but again, I've navigated with my husband. It's socially almost weirder if you never drink. How do you get people to enjoy their lives, and where to put alcohol in all of this?
Yeah, I think that it's one of those topics where it's very much a personal choice, but it has to be an informed personal choice. I don't think that we can, if someone is struggling and running into problems, that we have to step in, and especially as a psychiatrist, step in and have the conversation that's hard, which is, what can we do to help you with this? And that's never an easy conversation. And sometimes, to be honest, people are not ready for it. How I guide people is in a few ways. If you don't drink, no reason to start drinking now. There's, if you don't drink and that's not part of how you were raised or your culture, or it wasn't something that interested you, no reason to pick up that habit. But if you do consume alcohol, there are better ways to do it. One is just teaching people about alcohol and the impact on sleep. If you're relying on that glass of wine to help you sleep, it's going to upset your circadian rhythm and your sleep architecture. So not a good idea to be relying on it for sleep. If you are consuming too much and you picked up your use during the pandemic, this is the time where we need to kind of renegotiate that for you and help you figure out whether it's the, sparkling water in a martini glass, or having a beverage that's sparkling but doesn't have the calories or sweeteners or sugar that alcohol does. That's another good idea. And then if you're having a cocktail, cleaning up the kind of cocktail. So none of the added sugars, the juices, the simple syrup, which is simply sugar, the multiple types of alcohol in it, because those just only add to the sugar load and the calories that you don't need to consume. So if you're going to have a cleaner version of a cocktail, a fresh squeeze of a citrus fruit versus a juice, and do it with awareness. Do it with awareness, because there is a body of, certainly a body of research around alcohol where it doesn't damn alcohol entirely. There are some benefits to it, but I think that becomes confusing for people. So, it's my job to figure out the science behind it. But my guidance for people is, don't pick it up if you don't drink. If you drink, drink in moderation. And if it's a problem, you're going to hear from your friends, family, or probably one of your doctors like myself to say, look, maybe this is a conversation we need to have. And the reason I come to this, Gabby, because I see a lot of polarization around topics like this. And I think that as a doctor, I've got to understand that my patients come from all sorts of backgrounds. They may have never drank alcohol. They may come from parents who are alcoholic. They may have had very horrific childhoods where alcohol was a part of that, and they either choose not to drink or they're struggling with it themselves. So you've got to be open in order to be able to help them. And that's where this philosophy of finding the path for that individual, to me, just makes the most amount of sense.
And I have to say, and again, tonally, you feel to me like a person who would be so easy to talk to, is taking shame away from all of this, taking shame away from the ice cream
Correct.
at 11 o'clock at night, taking away the shame of maybe drinking too much alcohol, and getting to, hey, how can we make this better for you? And letting people know that everybody is battling something and we all have this opportunity. So I appreciate that, because I think that sort of keeps people holding things in, because they think that it's somehow, something about their character, when it's like, no, this is like fighting a real battle. And how do you get a system in place to help you?
It is like fighting a battle, and that's where even understanding that physiology is involved in this, our brain is involved in this, our body's involved. I think it's very scary for people to just see things in the media or on social media, or however they consume information, with parts of their liver and comments about alcohol. I think it's very scary, and I think that, in my opinion, I will educate my patients and I'll give them exactly that same kind of information, but in a way that is not shaming. Because when you hear that, you're already struggling with something. Sometimes it's soda, sometimes it's a similar thing, but drinking too much of soda or energy drinks because of brain fog, of just feeling so exhausted through this time that we've had. And whatever it is, the shame doesn't help, because the shame just makes people feel worse. So taking away that process and helping them find a way that they can communicate with you is the most important. And also feel people do so many different things with food or beverages. It could be coffee. It could, you have to embrace what the person is doing and offer them the help when they need it. And addictions, yes, that's an intervention moment.
Yeah, you must be a good poker player, because you must hear some wild stuff and then you have to be like, oh, okay, well, let's talk about that. So I read one time that, and this was a long time ago, that Americans consume a lot, or something on average, 20% of their calories in a liquid form. Am I off the park on this?
I don't know the most recent stat on that, but I would I would agree, because people do drink a lot of soda and just sweetened beverages. I say sweetened iced tea that's pre-made, or even healthy drinks like kombucha. When added sugars added to it, it's just, you have to look at the balance of the amount of sugar on the label. So I don't know the exact stat, but I would agree with that. I know, I think one of the things that people don't realize is about alcohol is, when you do consume, say you are consuming a lot of alcohol, you can really be struggling with anxiety, because it's sort of the chicken and egg story. You might be drinking the alcohol to calm your mind, but the unfortunate reality is you're worsening aspects of how that is physiologically breaking down in your body. And you can be waking up with extreme anxiety and a heart racing and have almost mild withdrawal. So it's really a very delicate balance. On the other hand, if you're not consuming enough water just to hydrate, you can be dehydrated and experience anxiety. So important to understand the balance. Yeah.
And it's really bad for people listening if you're dehydrated and then you go to bed, it's very hard on your heart. I mean, it is something that we have to be mindful. I have certain days where I'm like, oh, really? Have you even had water today? So I think that's a constant. On the sugar part, the last question I have on the sugar part is stevia. I was really fascinated because, if you eat a stevia leaf, a plant, it's very sweet. I personally, you go, a few drops in a tea because it's kind of bitter, but stevia is so powerfully sweet. But even that, maybe you don't have an insulin reaction, but the brain, maybe we can just sort of talk about stevia specifically.
So stevia is natural and I think that is where it could be a little bit of a trap, because it's not entirely bad. It's definitely an option for people if if you use a little bit, like a couple of drops in tea, and that's, but if baking with stevia, cooking with stevia, putting it everywhere where it's just taking over sugar, that's too much for your body and your brain. Unfortunately, there are studies that showed that even with things like stevia, they can actually impact your anxiety. So we've got to make sure that if you have a certain condition, one of the things we do is we check substances that you might be thinking of, like the fruited yogurt I mentioned. A patient of mine had read my book and was eating a ton of yogurt, just one every day, and sometimes as a snack. But she was eating the small sizes, but not realizing the amount of added sugars they had in it. So sometimes we're trying to do the right thing, but we just don't have all the information. With artificial sweeteners in general, the way that they work is if you think about a little packet of stevia or any artificial sweetener, there's a tiny bit, right, compared to the amount of sugar you might add in a teaspoon. This is because they are hypersweet. So another word for them is non-nutritive sweeteners. They are hypersweet, and what happens is they enter your body, and then the way that our bodies work, the body starts to think, well, sugar is on the way, and it starts to react in that way. But the sugar doesn't arrive because it's actually not sugar, it's a sweetener. And that's one of the things that actually upsets the balance, in addition to the fact that artificial sweeteners actually disrupt the gut microbiome to varying degrees. So the general guidance is use in moderation, don't overdo it. There were a couple that had less of an impact. Erythritol was one of them, less of an impact on insulin resistance. But then there were other research came out about erythritol and the heart and other things. So with a lot of artificial sweetness, sometimes I'm super cautious, and the reason is I don't think we have all of the research yet. They're newer sweeteners, and we're still evolving to see what the research shows. So moderation, try not to be too reliant on them. I will use a touch of honey, and even though all of the sugar, all of these different forms of sugar breakdown to sugar, the issue is honey has other benefits for it. So if you're not entirely plant-based and you're willing to have some honey, that's an option too, because it comes with other benefits. And to me, that's a little bit my offsetting the sugar by taking it in that way.
Yes, and it comes from nature, so your body's like, oh, I know this, I know what to do with this, and they even say like coconut sugar has minerals and everything in moderation, but I think that
it has other things.
Yeah, I think the fact that we think there's a sort of a biological free lunch anywhere, we keep trying. I like it. I want it too, but it's so far it's not showing up. The other two areas that you really talk about is we now people are really dialed into, seed oils, vegetable oils. And, going back to the French fries, people don't realize too, mostly if you're going to go to a restaurant, it is less expensive to cook with these oils. And if you have a fried food like a French fry, the worst thing is that the oil's heated up, cooled down, heated back up. When it's being used. So this is also where it becomes a dangerous oil, but you're finding, hey, let's stick to high level olive oil and coconut and avocado. And is there any other oils that you like? Macadamia nut oil doesn't go bad, right?
So with macadamia nut oil, it's still made from the nut itself. So usually it's used in cold preparations. It's not usually a high heat oil. My favorites are just generally extra virgin olive oil, and for higher heat cooking, avocado oil. I'll use a touch of coconut oil, and I will use butter or ghee, so clarified butter, or some butter itself, but all in moderation. So that if I'm depending on what I'm cooking, these are things I will add, because there's also been a lot of rethinking around and not all physicians on board with this, but rethinking of our studies of saturated fat. So I think a little bit of butter is okay. This nutrition, in the world of nutrition, that things are changing all of the time.
Dr. Naidoo, are you
I
being
well,
diplomatic right now?
I am being diplomatic, because even I really started to revisit my thinking because a very important study came out really at the beginning of COVID in 2020, and it was the most cited article in JACC, which is the Journal of the American College of Clinical Cardiology. I think I may have botched that, but it was the most cited paper, and it really looked at saturated fat. So whereas I went from the beginning of my clinic where I was really saying to people, don't eat this amount of butter or this amount of red meat, I've relaxed that a little bit to be more inclusive of the quality, and again in moderation, so that you're having quality food. And I'd much rather someone have a steak or whatever their choice of protein is, or grow tofu, whatever it is, but have it be a quality product than a processed. One of the things that processed meats have in them are nitrates, which drive depression. So it's just one more thing.
It is very interesting how, and who knows the politics behind it, where they can say like fat is bad, and how we culturally take so long to shift
Yeah.
the thinking on that. Gluten. Now, if we did wheat the way we used to do it, and it was farmed the way it was, it wouldn't have. I kind of feel this way about dairy. Maybe I'm wrong, but if I lived in Pennsylvania and had access to a Quaker farm where I could get real whole raw dairy, I think a lot of people have found that they're actually not lactose intolerant. They're more the process intolerant. But gluten seems to be one of those foods that we sort of worked through being, in food processing, that don't seem to support mood.
This is mostly correct. There's in fact a lot of evidence that gluten can impact levels of anxiety, and again, it's the type of gluten, right? We have to realize that an artisanal loaf of sourdough bread, which has a fermentation process, and a fermented starter has actually less sugar. So maybe that's an option if you occasionally want a slice of bread. But the processed sliced bread in our supermarkets, the type that you leave on your kitchen counter, you forget, you go away on vacation, you come back and guess what? It's still there. This is a sign to tell you that, it's really not that great because it's pumped up with preservatives and stabilizers and colorants and all of that. So guidance on gluten with my practice, I have to work on a slow elimination with people. If I identify that this could be an issue for them, we remove it, we do it slowly, and we see if they have an uptick in their improvement of their mood, an improvement of their anxiety. And I do that simply because people are very used to eating bread. And unless they come into it with a gluten intolerance or celiac, it's tough to separate the person from their lunchtime sandwich that they're used to. So how do you do it? And to prove the point, we'll often just work slowly to eliminate something, replace it with a different type of maybe non-gluten grain, something that's a little bit more nutritious. People do need some whole grains from other foods, but it just doesn't have to be the processed breads that we're used to eating.
Yeah. And you're a big advocate of fiber. So
definitely. And you can get fiber from whole grains, but you can also get it from vegetables and fruit. So it's not like you have to eat bread. If you are eating healthier, cutting back, say you're concerned about insulin resistance and you're monitoring your carbohydrate intake, well, there are other options for you to get fiber too.
Is such a win in this conversation is if I took somebody to a trainer who said, hey, I want to lose 20 pounds or more or whatever, all of these same things that would benefit and elevate your mood and maybe support you through that will also support, cognitive function, weight management. It's a great, because you're sort of hitting 3 or 4 birds with one stone. You're saying the same thing, quite frankly, just from a different point of view.
It's correct. So I think that the way that I define it is the outcomes that I'm looking for may not be the same as, say, the next doctor, but there are some similar results that happen, which are great for my patients. Because I was going to say, when we talked earlier, sometimes 2 weeks later, a patient will call and say, well, I don't know why this happened, but I lost 2 pounds. And part of it is they're just eating, honestly, Gabby, they're just eating whole foods versus the processed foods that they had been eating. They've made even one or two switches in what they're doing. And so I think that one of the benefits is that people do lose weight. Their brain fog improves, their concentration improves. And by fending off inflammation, one of the things people don't realize about inflammation and their cognitive health is many of us may have, very silent little changes in the brain and nothing may happen to that. In a similar way, people may be walking around with, tiny cancer cells and nothing will happen unless they have a lifestyle change or something else makes that cell change. And one of the driving factors in cognitive disorders is if we're eating for really to fend off neuroinflammation, if we're eating healthier, leaning into those vegetables, eating the fiber, having the healthy fats, having some the so-called treats in moderation, and really leaning to better foods, you actually are working to reduce inflammation in your brain, which is very powerful, because what that could be doing for any one of us is improving our longevity, because we're really fending off any type of cognitive change by eating healthier for our brain and for our brain cells.
Yeah. And speaking of that, you're a big, you sort of have looked at diets because, everyone's so different: keto, paleo, vegetarian, vegan, whatever. And there is you sort of have looked at, and people talk about the Mediterranean diet all the time, but for you, this is one that's showing up very nicely. And there's actually an island in Greece, I think, that where it's literally, I think there's no sign of Alzheimer's.
Is it Icaria? Yeah, is it one of the blue zones?
Yes. Yeah. And literally that particular island is almost 7 years. They live 7 years longer than any of the other Greek islands. But to your point, living without Alzheimer's or dementia, I mean, I think a lot of people are concerned about that. So it's just reminding people how powerful this is. Can we, I'd imagine the way you grew up, there was a lot of spices and things about that. So, cause when we, I think people sort of feel like, well, how am I going to get all those colors or that diversity? And you're like, yes. And you're a chef yourself. And it's like, yeah, no, the spices count, like this being playful and experimental, and you offer tons of recipes and ways to do that. But maybe you could just, on the best cognitive diet, you talked about the Mediterranean, but polyphenols and turmeric. Maybe we could just talk about some of your favorite little spices that people don't realize, like, oh no, this counts too.
I love that topic. So love spices. And I also think people overlook the fact that they sort of the hidden ammunition we have in our kitchens, because if you're buying a pure spice, they sugar-free, calorie-free, salt-free, and they add flavor. So they're rich in antioxidants. The colors are often those polyphenols from the plants that they are grown from, and anti-inflammatory. So they hit a lot of the high notes for really our brain health. To your earlier point, they also help our physical body and the rest of our health. Turmeric with a pinch of black pepper is a great one. If you don't cook with it, add a little quarter teaspoon to a tea, a soup, a smoothie to get you started. And a pinch of black pepper actually activates the active ingredient to make it about 2,000% more bioavailable to your brain and body. So that's an easy hack. If you can use turmeric, always add a pinch of black pepper. There are also things like rosemary and thyme, herbs that I love. And there's a kind of secret antioxidant called luteolin. And that actually has been shown to help brain fog. One of the things that a lot of people are sort of struggling with. I hear this about, feeling a slump in the afternoon, not feeling like they can concentrate in the afternoon. And luteolin can be found in Mexican oregano, hot and sweet peppers, thyme, parsley, and so many other things. So these are just little easy things that we can do to brighten up our cognition, to help our attention, and over time to really help our brain health. Even the process of fending off that inflammation is very powerful for cognition.
And you stated that Julia Childs, you were a fan of her. And I thought it was interesting because, there's so many things that we do in tradition that we forget why we did it because it just gets passed along for, generation to generation. But the original reason, there was usually a purpose. And what I found interesting, we talked about, because people are always confused, prebiotic, probiotic, which does what. And you talked about a great prebiotic is when you cook a base for so many dishes, like with onions and garlic, that this actually is a way to support your gut health. And I think these small reminders to people of, hey, these practices that things taste great anyway, and for a lot of recipes, they're bases anyway, that this actually supports your gut.
This is all correct. So, there's a preparation called sofrito, and it's basically, in many cultures, it's, a base of garlic and onions. Both of those are actual active prebiotics that we should be eating anyway. So when they form the base of a different dish, and each culture will have its own recipe to make maybe a special sauce with tomatoes, or in Indian cuisine, it may be the base for a curry, where we add a lot more spices. These are, easy things that you can get done. And you instead of thinking, oh, well, I have to take there's a place for supplements, but oh, I have to take that as a supplement. Actually, you can be doing it the way that you're eating food every single day.
And I just loved that point. And then maybe since you mentioned it, supplements, are there things that you think, hey, this is a good fortifying for most people?
Turns out in the United States, people should be checking, especially when it comes to anxiety. They should, this is a routine test your doctor will do in your annual checkup, should be checking their magnesium levels and their zinc levels. But many Americans don't have enough magnesium, and magnesium levels being low can actually worsen your anxiety. So it's an easy thing to check. You could also, consume foods. But also, I live in the far Northeast, so a lot of people may be deficient in vitamin D, and that's another one worth checking. And then your B vitamins. B vitamins are really, I like to think B vitamins are brain vitamins, but they actually have a lot of good functions. But I want people to be thinking about getting in those B vitamins because it makes a difference.
Are there cultures that are sort of doing well with their magnesium and zinc, and what do you think it is in their foods that they're doing as a regular practice that maybe we're not?
Let me answer it in sort of in a different way, which is most Americans are eating the standard American diet, which is called SAD for a reason, because of there's a lot of processed, ultra processed foods and fast foods involved. And cultures where they're just eating more actual food and whole foods and actual vegetables, or less processed meats, but just if they're eating meat, they're eating, just the actual steak or the chicken or whatever it is, or lots of seafood because they're rich in omega-3s. I think they do win because the difference of eating more whole foods versus fast foods or processed, ultra processed foods are where those nutrients just naturally come from.
I don't know about you, but when I like eat at a friend's house, or maybe I go to a restaurant and there's something in there that I don't know what it is, but it just is amazing. And then you learn, and then you mess around with it at your own house and you do it.
Yeah.
There is something so fun about learning about a new spice or a new vegetable, figuring out, someone sharing with you how to prepare it.
It's so fun.
And then being able to present it. You're like, oh, this, I didn't know how to do this. And now
this is something different.
I love that.
I do that all the time. I love it. Yeah, I love that too. It's just a way to expand your palate, find new ingredients you can work with, make your food more interesting. Because I think when we have these conversations, and I think you and I will agree on this, food is also enjoyable and it's meant to fuel our bodies, but it's all, and our brain, but it's also to be enjoyed, So, how do we balance that up with feeling less restricted and less rule bound, but also being kind of mindful about the choices we're making?
Well, I really appreciate this conversation and you being a really powerful bridge and interpreter between, people feeling good and supported, but also giving them the tools, not just throwing a pill at them. I really, really appreciate that. Can you just remind people all the places that they can find you?
Thank you, Gabby. So you can find me online at my website, which is umanaidoomd.com. Follow me on social media where we have links to the new book and all sort of updated information, and we share research all the time. It's at DRUMANAIDOO, and the book is coming out soon, and it's called Calm Your Mind with Food, and it's available for pre-order or,
Yeah.
I think it'll help your anxiety. I believe it will. So,
Dr. Naidoo, thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabby. It's such a pleasure to see you and talk to you again.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you want to learn more, there is a ton of valuable information on my website. All you have to do is go to GabrielleReece.com or head to the episode show notes to find a full breakdown with helpful links to studies, research, books, podcasts, and so much more. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and send them to @GabbyReece on Instagram. And if you feel inspired, please subscribe. I'll see you next week. This podcast is brought to you by Laird Superfood. In 2015, Laird Superfood was created, but it was really actually created in my kitchen by my husband, Laird. And he was always experimenting with coffees and other ingredients for performance. And lo and behold, Laird Superfood was born. And we have beautiful coffees and creamers and protein bars and other things. But one of the things I'm very excited about is our new greens product. A lot of Americans are not getting enough fruits and vegetables. Something like 85% are not getting enough vegetables and 80% are not getting enough fruit. And we need fiber. So for me personally, I'm always trying to encourage people, and I know this is Laird's philosophy as well, is real food, right? Let's try to get as much of the good stuff, the minerals, the nutrients, the macro, the micronutrients from real food. But it's hard to do. Our soil's different. People are busy. Maybe you don't know what you're getting at your grocery store. So this is a way to get it done and bridge some of those nutritional gaps. And what I also really appreciate about it, besides that it tastes good, I just do it in water first thing in the morning, then I'm done. And then I actually go and have my coffee after. But we use upcycled fruits and veggies, so things that won't go to waste. Maybe they're not really pretty, so we use them in our fruits and veggies. We use no fillers. So your body actually knows what to do with the ingredients. They know how to absorb it. There's fiber. And also, we never use any artificial or natural flavors. This is something that is harder than people realize, because to amplify flavors, a lot of times even, using natural flavors is the way to do it. So I'm excited to share with you. And if you'd like to try it out, all you have to do is go to lairdsuperfood.com. And if you punch in the code GABBY, GABBY 20, you will receive 20% off.